Now, to help us better understand the importance and significance of the liaison office, we have with us Dr. Myong-hyun from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Thank you for taking the time to come back on the show today.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, the Joint Liaison Office is opening on Friday. Can you explain a little bit to our viewers what this office is and what role it's expected to play between the two Koreas?
Well, the setting up of the liaison office was actually planned, was actually announced in the Panmunjom Declaration back in April. And in Article 1 and Section 3, it actually mandates the two Koreas to set up a liaison office in Kaesong Industrial Complex for consultation between the two Korean governments, as well as to speed up and assist people-to-people exchanges. So that's the role of the liaison office. And then also the liaison office, in a way, is very similar to the interest section that the United States has with some countries in the world where there's no formal diplomatic relations. So in a way, this could be interpreted as an important step forward in terms of diplomatic development between the two Koreas.
So a diplomatic stepping stone, for, some could
say.
Yeah,
you could say that, exactly.
So in the announcement yesterday we just saw, they mentioned that it will help improve inter-Korean relations, help lower military tensions and promote peace in the region as well. How important is this office going to be, and will it be able to do the things that it's just said there as well?
Well, clearly it's in a way it's very symbolic because we already have a mode of communication between the two Koreas. We have the hotline between the two leaders, between Seoul and Pyongyang. But having a liaison office, which is actually a step before having, say, like embassies or representative office in the respective capitals, it actually constitutes formalization of the evolution in the inter-Korean relations. So in that sense, a political step forward. And also, it also shows that the inter-Korean dialogue, as it evolves going forward, it's not going to be an ad hoc process in which there's this intermittent meetings between the two Koreas whenever there's a political demand for it. There will be a permanent channel of communication, diplomatic relationship between the two Koreas. So in that sense, it symbolizes the permanence of the inter-Korean dialogue.
How much is it of like a symbolic move, or is it a practical move? Because, I mean, there was, as you said, ways of communicating before through certain communication channels. What were those problems, and what limitations did they have that this office would now circumvent? So
I think we should put the importance of the liaison office in the institutionalization of the inter-Korean dialogue, which is a symbolic step in the sense that there are many other ways of communication between the two Koreas. After all, the distance between two capitals is very small. But then we have to regard the liaison office as an actual permanent institutionalization of the inter-Korean dialogue. So in that sense, I don't think there's been any precedent like this in the inter-Korean relations before.
Now, it's been delayed. I mean, obviously it was announced in April, and we were expecting it to happen quite quickly, but it's taken some time. Now, the rumors are that it was because of the US and Washington. They had reluctance and reservations about it. But for now, it must be that the US have actually given the green light for this to go ahead. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to go ahead with it without Washington's blessing, no?
Well, clearly, I don't think there's been explicit blessing coming from Washington. But then we have to look at the events that took place in the past couple of days. The special envoy from South Korea went to Pyongyang, met with Kim Jong-un, and came back to Seoul with a message from Kim Jong-un, but as well as a letter for President Trump. And we have heard from the media that North Korea and the United States are in touch, talking about the second U.S. DPRK summit, possibly taking place in next month, in October. So this is showing that there's evolution in terms of a dialogue between U.S. and DPRK, and that's essentially giving a green light to further development the inter-Korean dialogue. I think it was well played by the South Korean government to wait out until there's an official letter coming from North Korea addressed to President Trump, which allows South Korea to go ahead with setting up the liaison office.
But the sticking point was the fact that having this joint liaison office could be violating some sort of international sanctions that the UN has placed on North Korea. Do you think there are any problems there?
Well, the potential for violating sanctions is actually pretty small. We're talking about a very small scale presence of the South Korean government in the North Korean territory. We're talking, when we discuss about the potential sanctions violation because of the setting up of the liaison office, it involved a very small amount of construction materials as well as fuel. it's not going to have a material impact on the North Korean economy. So I think the reason why the U.S. government was skeptical or like a little bit, I would say, trying to hold back the setting up the office was because the U.S. was trying to avoid the perception that the inter-Korean dialogue was moving ahead of the denuclearization talks. So it's shifting the weight from denuclearization to inter-Korean dialogue. So I think that was more of a political angle there.
And finally, before we move on, I just want to talk a bit more about the symbolic nature of this, because some would say that it is purely symbolic and that it doesn't really change things between their inter-Korean relationship, and that if the North Korea decides, it can be shut down at any point, and it's wasting manpower and resources, sending like 20 staff from South Korea to man it 24/7. How possible is it, do you think, that North Korea could shut it down if they wanted to? How does that work?
Oh, that's clearly the realm of possibilities. I mean, North Korea didn't even just shut down our office, actually shut down the entire Kaesong industrial complex. So that's definitely possible. But then I think we have to remember that we reached this stage of inter-Korean dialogue through the accumulation of small symbolic steps. It started with the North Korean participation in the Pyeongchang Olympics, which actually progressed into the first summit, inter-Korean summit, which led to the Singapore summit back in June. So we are seeing like there's a political momentum building, and the setting up the liaison's office will add to this political momentum. So in that sense, it's symbolic, but it's material too to the process.
Let's move on to some other inter-Korean relations that are, exchanges that are happening right now. For example, working-level military talks took place on Thursday. What's interesting about this one is that it was North Korea who was the one who requested South Korea to come and talk. What can we read from this? Why did the North Koreans request this meeting?
I think the North Koreans also want to really, really settle down the development in the inter-Korean dialogue. I mean, the importance of the military talks lies with the fact that this actually contributes to the building up of the confidence between the two Korean militaries, and also has lessen the tension along the DMZ. So this sends a very strong signal to not just to South Korea, but also to the United States that North Korea is committed to the reducing tension in the Korean Peninsula and contributing to the stability. And also, even though it doesn't really mention about the potential denuclearization steps that North Korea could take in the coming days, it's actually pointing in that direction. So in that sense, it's very positive.
Do you think the talks here could could be talking about the upcoming inter-Korean summit next week, for next Tuesday?
You mean the liaison's office talk or the military talk?
The military talks, yes.
No, I think it's a separate track. There's a military track, and I think this follows from the Panmunjom declarations. The two militaries are actually supposed to talk about confidence-building measures and tension reduction measures. So I think they are going along with that program, and the inter-Korean summit is actually a different political process. So I think, clearly, but the military process is under the political process. So the success of the inter-Korean summit is more important than what's going on at the military talks.
So looking ahead to those, to the inter-Korean summit next week, there's some other rumors and reports that have been flying around the last couple of days. For example, there's been some reports that say about a dozen top business leaders from major South Korean conglomerates, such as Samsung and Hyundai, will be accompanying President Moon to Pyongyang. What do you make of this development, and what message do you think this sends out?
Well, the message is very clear. The message is that if North Korea commits to complete denuclearization, the South Korea is also committed to assisting North Korea with huge amounts of economic assistance and investments. And the commitment will come as the personal guarantee by the head of these conglomerates. So I think that therein lies the symbolism of this visit by the major heads of these major Korean corporations. So in a way, you could say this is the more sophisticated version of the small movie that President Trump showed to Chairman Kim Jong-un back in Singapore, promising the riches to North Korea if North Korea committed to denuclearization. It's a very similar message, I would say.
If you're being cynical, some would say it's quite a blunt message to sending to North Korea, and there's some risk that it could be perceived like negatively here in South Korea, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, clearly. I mean, why? I mean, I think there could be some criticism. I think there are already criticisms about the fact that why the government, South Korean government, is involving head of major conglomerates, which could have repercussions to their business activities if the ongoing dialogue between the two Koreas actually falls apart. So there's a risk there. But then I think this government is so committed to developing this inter-Korean dialogue that it's willing to take the risk.
There are hopes that the success at next week's Inter-Korean summit could pave the way towards a North Korea-US summit, a second meeting between Trump and Kim Jong-un. Do you see it that way too?
So I think there's more uncertainty about the realization of the US-DPRK summit than the Inter-Korean summit. The quote-unquote success of the Inter-Korean summit is a given, I would say. It's going to lead to a successful joint declaration that North Korea again is committed to denuclearization and South Korea is committed to help North Korea economically and politically. On the other hand, the realization of the US-DPRK summit is still uncertain. I mean, I think President Trump is facing a very busy domestic agenda ahead of the November midterm elections. And I think also, in order for the summit to be able to take place, I think North Korea should commit to further positive steps towards denuclearization. And even if North Korea completes that, there's if you remember what happened right before the Singapore summit, there's a lot of back and forth and the threats of cancellation about the summit. So same thing could be happening this October between North Korea and the United States about the summit.
Washington seems to be keeping a close eye on developments here, with recently this newly appointed U.S. Special Representative of North Korea, Stephen Biegun. He completed his visit to South Korea and is now headed off to China. He'll be going to Tokyo, and then apparently he'll be coming back to South Korea as well. What do you think his role and his agenda is for the U.S. at this point?
So we know what his role is when it comes to U.S. diplomacy. The reason why Secretary Pompeo wanted to take Mr. Biegun along to his first visit to Pyongyang, which was eventually canceled, was to somehow introduce him to the North Korean government authorities and tell them that Mr. Biegun will be in charge of U.S. diplomacy with North Korea from going forward. And the reason is Secretary Pompeo has many other outstanding issues other than North Korea. So in that sense, he was the permanent representative of the U.S. government in this region regarding North Korea. So I think he should be, the reason why he's doing this shuttle diplomacy across different capitals in Asia is to coordinate a response to North Korea's denuclearization steps, also to make sure that the sanctions measures are being observed.
It's also said that he's going back to Seoul, which is quite unusual for these envoys during this kind of trip. Normally they visit one city and then they visit the other and then they return home. What do you think, why do you think he's coming back to Seoul, and what kind of, do you think he's carrying a message to the Seoul government?
So I think he'll be bringing back his impressions and feedbacks from the Chinese capital and the Japanese capital. And we know the Chinese perception of what's going on in the Korean Peninsula is probably different from the Japanese one. So I think that this is something that Steve Biegun would like to discuss with the South Korean counterparts when he comes back to Seoul.
That's all we have time for today, but thank you for coming in. And I know we'll all be keeping a close eye on the Inter-Korean Summit next week.
Yeah,
we'll be very interested to hear your thoughts on it when you come back.
Yeah, definitely. All right, thank you.